Welcome to Artificial Evidence, the podcast where the algorithm knows more than it should. I'm your host, Owen Carver. Tonight, we journey to the desolate Arizona desert, where a decrepit motel along a forgotten stretch of Route 66 hides decades of sinister secrets. Trapped by a relentless dust storm, 5 strangers find themselves at the mercy of the elements and each other. This is the story of the Dusty Spur. The Dusty Spur sat like a relic of another era, its neon sign humming weakly against the darkening sky. The roadside motel was a shadow of its former self, a crumbling refuge for weary travelers too desperate or too lost to care about its dilapidated state. Surrounding it was an expanse of desert, flat and lifeless, with the occasional tumbleweed skittering by as if to mock the very idea of permanence. Claire Brenner pulled into the gravel lot just as the last light of day bled into the horizon. Her car had been struggling for miles, the temperature gauge creeping perilously close to red. She cursed her luck, but as she stepped out, the air crackling with the faint scent of ozone, she realized her situation was about to get worse. The Dusty Spur was almost entirely empty, save for a couple of other cars parked haphazardly near the lobby. The flickering sign promised vacancy, though it might as well have read abandon hope. Inside, the atmosphere was no better. The lobby reeked of stale coffee and mildew. Dale Fenton, the motel's owner, shuffled out from behind the counter. His lined face, framed by thinning grey hair, barely masked the nervous energy radiating from him. He handed Claire a key without much ceremony, muttering about the storm rolling in and advising her to settle in quickly. Her room was musty but serviceable. The walls were paper thin, and Claire could hear snippets of conversation from the adjacent rooms. In one, a man's smooth, practiced voice, likely Mason Hargrove, spoke in clipped tones. In another, a girl's muffled sobs carried through the vents. Claire didn't know it yet, but those voices would haunt her long after she left the Dusty Spur. By the time the storm hit, the motel was shrouded in a swirling wall of sand. The power flickered, casting long, jagged shadows down the dimly lit corridors. Claire ventured to the lobby for a cup of coffee, where she crossed paths with Mason, who flashed her a salesman's grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He claimed to sell agricultural equipment, but there was something off about his polished demeanor, something predatory. Lila Parsons was harder to read. The teenage runaway clutched a battered backpack like it contained her very soul. Her defiant stare dared anyone to pry, but Claire noticed the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. Deputy Tom Grayson arrived just as the storm peaked, his broad shoulders dusted with sand. He claimed he was checking on travelers, but his questions felt more like an interrogation, especially when they turned to Lila. The first sign of real trouble came when Mason pounded on Claire's door, breathless and pale. He claimed to have found Lila unconscious in her room, a pool of blood beneath her head. They found her backpack unzipped, its contents, a stack of neatly bundled cash, spilling onto the floor. Deputy Grayson took charge, but his motives were murky at best. He was far more interested in the money than in helping Lila, whose pulse was faint but steady. Dale insisted they couldn't risk calling for help in the storm, leaving the group trapped with their suspicions and fear. As the night dragged on, Claire pieced together fragments of overheard conversations and subtle clues. Mason wasn't a salesman, he was a courier for a criminal gang, using his charm to hide his darker pursuits. The money in Lila's bag was from a bank heist, and it was clear she'd taken it to escape whatever life she was running from. Deputy Grayson, meanwhile, wasn't just a cop. He had ties to the same gang and was using his badge to clean up loose ends. Claire's suspicions solidified when she found him rifling through Dale's office, his flashlight revealing faded photographs of past guests, many of whom had never checked out. The storm raged on, but it was inside the motel that the real chaos unfolded. Claire confronted Dale, whose weary facade crumbled under the weight of decades of guilt. He admitted to turning a blind eye, or worse, to the crimes that had unfolded under his roof. In exchange for silence, he collected his cut and lived in fear of the secrets buried in the desert sand. The tension reached its breaking point when Claire tricked Mason and Grayson into a standoff, using Dale's confession to turn them against each other. As tempers flared, Lila regained consciousness, snatched her backpack, and fled into the storm. By the time the dust settled, only Claire and Dale were left to face the aftermath. Claire recorded every word of Dale's confession, ensuring that his secrets wouldn't die with him. The next morning, as she drove away, she passed the sheriff's car heading toward the motel. Dale's haunted expression in her rearview mirror was a grim reminder that some truths come at a cost. But as Claire disappeared down Route 66, she couldn't shake the feeling that the desert wasn't done with her, or anyone else who dared to uncover its mysteries. This has been another episode of Artificial Evidence. Thank you for listening, and remember, the algorithm knows.